Do we have any technical interruption?
Yes. Can I go on?
Yes, yes, please.
The picture is.
We can see you well.
We don't have the picture.
But we can see you and hear you well.
Okay, then I'll go on. The best way of dealing with expansion of the Soviet power, but no one really could predict the demise of the Soviet Union from world politics. So the implosion of one of the one-party systems across Eastern Europe came really suddenly, and to the great amazement of the masses and of scholars, I must add. Not many could predict this. Unexpectedly and swiftly, the bipolar world order came to an end. The system imploded easily, contrary to everyone's belief that it will be very difficult for that system to fall, while building democracy we thought would be easy. Again, it turned the opposite. Building democracy has become a very, very difficult job for many Eastern European countries, like Macedonia, for instance, without a day of democratic tradition. Now, with the breakdown of this world order, of this bipolar world order, Yugoslavia, as a leader of the non-aligned movement and periodically an important postman between the two superpowers, also lost its position in world politics. Contrary to the beliefs of many people then and now, many still believe that the disintegration of the federation was a deliberate action of Western powers. In fact, it was because of lack of interest of the West for the future of Yugoslavia. The structure had, bipolar structure had disintegrated. Yugoslavia lost its place and was not anymore of the same interest as it was prior to that. And interest shifted towards the Soviet Union with the enormous nuclear arsenal, of course, in an attempt to avoid the dangers of a disorderly transition to democracy. Now, I remember, and everyone who lived through the period knows that, this was a time of great expectations. The end of history was proclaimed by the American scholar Francis Fukuyama in his famous book, The End of History and the Last Man. He wrote that humanity had reached not just the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. This is the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government, wrote Fukuyama. Now, liberal democracy won over autocracy and dictatorship, but we believe too much about this change. A new world order was proclaimed in which the rule of law governs the conduct of nations. Violence, it was said, has no place in today's Europe. We were told, for instance, at the conference on Yugoslavia by European lawyers, diplomats, and politicians. And law means not only peaceful solution, but also just solutions. New on the European continent, I remember Monsieur Badinter speaking, is that imperialist forces do not impose solutions, because for the first time in our history, we live in a Europe where all countries support the principle of democracy, the rights of man, and freedom. Alas, it did not turn out to be that way. We all know, especially us from the former Yugoslavia, things did not turn out exactly that way. We had bloody ethnic wars, first in Yugoslavia and later elsewhere in Europe. And they seem to prove the realists' argument that it is still violence, not law, that sets the international agenda. But many of those who are right to be critical of this global outbreak of euphoric optimism in the 90s, we were so optimistic at that time, they are wrong to dismiss the whole idea of a new Europe. The Macedonian case, our case, demonstrates that important changes had occurred in the international system of states generally, and in our part also in the Balkans. One should not easily dismiss the fact that in 1991, there was a choice to be made by politicians in each of the 6 units of the federation. Some chose force, some chose war. We in Macedonia chose peace and law, and then in the shadow, very much unnoticed by the world, in the shadow of the big wars in Yugoslavia, we achieved independence through a policy of peaceful self-determination. Now, it is right to say that in this process, we had to learn the hard way that law does not exist in a vacuum, but is part of a wider political context of sovereign states driven primarily by their interest. At the conference, there was an arbitration commission, and when the arbitration commission of the EC decided that Macedonia and Slovenia are the only 2 republics that fulfill the criteria for independence, that was a triumph of law. But when Germany decided to recognize Slovenia and Croatia, and Greece blocked Macedonia's recognition, it was politics all over again. Yet, this is the complex world that we entered in. With law on our side, we demanded recognition of the new Macedonian state. Now we are dealing with people, of course, as leaders of the Western states, and they were embarrassed sometimes, our Western counterparts, who personally had sympathies and supported our policy of peaceful self-determination, but their states could not extend recognition of Macedonians' independence because of Greek opposition. The reasons that we were given then made us understand world politics much better. The reasons had nothing to do with law, but everything to do with politics, like elections, like state interest, like lack of state interest, like priorities on the domestic political agenda, like alliance solidarity. These are things that we had to learn fast, which made the picture of international politics quite more complicated than what international lawyers will have it. Now, but it's a paradox, you know. Before we start praising the law, and put all the blame on politics, I have to admit that, again, politics helped us achieve independence. Namely, the constructive behavior of Macedonia was rewarded by the politicians in the US and Europe, who were critical of the destructive behavior of their ally, Greece. They could not, of course, another lesson for us, break the alliance. They could not disregard the interests of their respective states vis-a-vis their awkward partner. But it's a very interesting, they found ways to help us, usually from a safe distance and behind the curtain of international politics. It was at that time when, sympathizing with my agony over lack of international support for Macedonia, an American envoy who came to Macedonia spoke the truth. Macedonia, he whispered, is a tar baby of the Balkans. Tar baby, I asked myself, and I had to look it up in the dictionary, I must tell you, at that time. It meant several things. First, it meant a situation that no state will involve itself, fearing that it would get stuck in the problems of a small state. Now, big states usually, another lesson that we learned, usually distance themselves from problems of small states, because history teaches that many wars have started in that way, when the big state rushes to the aid of a small state and then conflict starts. Second is that other states, this phrase, tar baby, means that you will regret if you intervene, but you will regret also if you do not intervene. So again, it's a very complex situation for other states. This message, I understood it, was not to expect. What he told me was, in fact, do not expect too much from international law. Adapt to new situations. Look for compromises and try to survive. Being an American, he also said, do not rely on the false belief that regardless of what you do, the American cavalry will inevitably come to your rescue at the end of the film, as it happens in those Indian and cowboy films that we watched in our youth. So much for the new world order. This is what, in fact, we had to face, a very complicated order, which had the same characteristics of all the previous world orders. So we, meaning myself as foreign minister, President Gligorov, and the people around us who formulated our foreign policy, we immediately had to stop idealizing international law. We adapted to the new situation. No use crying. That was what the situation is. We made all the difficult compromises, and I must say we survived. Now, the world had not changed that much after all. This is what we learned, trying to become members of the international community. But help was always here in the form, let's say we had help in the form of a small contingent of American soldiers. Imagine, under the flag of the UN, which came from Germany, and they stationed themselves at the airport by chance, I think, but also to get out if things get really rough here, because it was a very small contingent of UN soldiers. The Americans had also problems keeping that contingent there because there was an opposition in the American Congress as to deploying such a small force which could not protect itself if attacked. So again, our counterparts in the United States, and we had direct communication with the Secretary of State at that time, Mr. Lawrence Eagleburger, who was known also as Lawrence from Macedonia, because in his youth, he was a secretary at the American Embassy in Belgrade and the organizer of humanitarian assistance for those afflicted by the terrible earthquake in Skopje in 1963. So we had an open communication with them, and America supported our independence, and its symbolic presence, I think, was primarily directed against both Serbia and Greece, that this territory was not here for the taking. There was also help through financial means, and other support came from various European states. And then there was something which we are also proud of, the support of the United Nations. It was our idea to go to the UN and ask for deployment of a preventive force on our borders. Since we did not have an army to defend our borders, we were really open to aggression. And I remember going to the UN at that time and speaking there. What they told me was, but we never go where there is peace. In Macedonia, there is peace. But finally, they decided, they understood what kind of problems we had, even though we had a laugh at that time when they said to me, Mr. Cyrus Vance and Lord Owen, they said, but we cannot defend Macedonia, you know that, if you are attacked. So what would our mission be if we deploy our troops at your borders? Well, I said, well, if we cry for help together, it might be easier. And then we all started laughing, but the deployment was achieved. The UN sent troops, which meant, of course, always in agreement with the big powers at the United Nations, especially the United States of America. And this gave us time. This gave this new fledgling state time to start organizing its defense. Up till then, it was only the police that, in fact, had this role of defending Macedonia. Now, in the meantime, recognition of Macedonia began in all these problems. Bulgaria first, Slovenia, Croatia, Turkey, Russia, to mention a few. But we knew that
it's okay, you can continue.
Okay.
Yes.
But we knew that recognition of the Western powers was of the utmost importance, since we already had defined at that time in the 90s, our foreign policy aims membership in NATO and the European Union. So I must tell you from experience, regardless of how many times they refused, we kept coming back, asking for new meetings and arguing our case. I'm speaking about the European Western powers and the Americans. Our case respected the declared European principles, and our behavior was sincere and honest. This is very important for small states. Sincerity and honesty is important. We were the most constructive participant, for instance, on the Conference of Yugoslavia, and the final document was drafted according to our proposals. Some of you might know the proposal of President Gligorov and Izetbegovic of some form of association, a confederation, which would prevent war in Yugoslavia, but keep a level of unity with each state being recognized in the UN as a sovereign state. Now, this was the end of the conference, which Milosevic refused to sign, and then this horrendous war continued, and the most terrible atrocities were committed after the Second World War. We achieved our independence through law, and in 1993, not much later than Slovenia and Croatia, some 11 months, we became members of the United Nations in a peaceful way. Now, turning to domestic policy, one would say, I think, an objective analyst would say that this was a great achievement, a big achievement, especially in view of the fact that nationalist politicians in the Balkans kept repeating that independence was not possible through law, but only through force, and that one had to spill blood for the independence of his country. Now, these people were proven wrong. I hate to think what would have happened if we had been proven wrong, what would have happened with us, who kept repeating that in today's Europe, with the support of the Union and with the support of the United States, we can achieve independence through peaceful self-determination. What would have happened to us, I can imagine, if things did not turn out that way. But the nationalists were proven wrong. Alas, again, a new situation, unexpected as always in international politics, came. We did not get everything to which we were entitled according to the law. Due to Greek opposition and the interests of the big powers vis-a-vis their awkward partner, we were admitted at the UN, not with our constitutional name, but under a reference, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Now, finally, Macedonian nationalism had a case. Sorry? Time?
No, I'm sorry. You can.
Can I continue?
Some other noise are coming here.
Other noises are coming. Okay,
Yes.
because I don't see you still.
We're here.
You see me and you hear me all the time.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Okay, here we are. So let me say, this is what happened in the international on the domestic field. This big achievement, I must say, was downgraded by this nationalist feeling in Macedonia, which is understandable for me. Any foreign minister would like to come on a white horse back home from the United Nations and, you know, bring the name and everything that the people want, but this does not happen in world politics. This is what happens in world politics, the story I am telling you. So finally, Macedonian nationalism, and there were nationalists throughout the political spectrum, not just in VMRO, everywhere, in the party, in SDSM, and in other parties. Now they had another case of historic humiliation of the Macedonian people. And so in the moment of the country's greatest victory, when it achieved its independence peacefully, became a sovereign state, one of the small nations of Europe, had its own state, and knowing world politics, we know that a 20 million Kurd population cannot have its state and will not have it probably anytime soon. Now this issue became a symbol of our nation's defeat. It started rolling inside. The feeling was that because of some kind of appeasement, that is how our foreign policy was described, as appeasement, it grew, you know, opposition to this policy grew as the fears from war were removed and the country moved into peace. So the more we move towards peace, the greater the resentment to a policy that brought peace because of this emotional tie of any people to its constitutional name, which is, of course, understandable. Now, the story behind the story is that the moment Macedonia was established as a sovereign state in international relations, politicians learned quickly that if you appeal to people's emotions, politics is easy. While if you appeal to the reason, it becomes very, very difficult. So the very emotional issue of the name became a source of political power and meant and still means, even now in the case with Bulgaria, still means electoral victories for parties and personal political promotion for leaders and members of parties. Now, when politics turned that way, a contest around manipulation with the emotions, I didn't feel ready to participate in that game. So I resigned. I resigned from politics. So let me just finish in a couple of words. The world has not changed that much. We are still in the dilemma whether we live in the world of Hobbes or we live in the world of Kant. Now, Hobbes saw the world as a jungle in which agreements without a sword are only empty words, in which states are in a state of war, like gladiators facing each other with guns and garrisons on their borders. Kant, on the other hand, saw the world as a union of free states, a union of democracies that create a state of peace, not a state of war. So what world are we living in? The answer is both worlds. Luckily, our small states, the Republic of Macedonia, now the Republic of North Macedonia, as you know, after the Prespa Agreement, is on the European continent, which after the catastrophic World War II and the Holocaust has embraced the ideas of Kant in Hobbes's world, I must say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the inspiring speech. Professor Maleski told us about the processes of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the position in Yugoslavia in that respect, the process of dissolution. We will speak about the peaceful self-determination of the Republic of Macedonia in that period of time, the obstacle that we faced in the process of the recognition, the conflict that exists among the law and politics, and then a great expectation and functionality, let's say, in the international law in some sort of situation where the power is in the other side, about the position of Macedonia as a tar baby, and then the useful policy of accommodation that is needed for the small states, and especially his position, his role and persistence, let's say, in building society based on democracy and peaceful transition from regime to the society that we live in. So we must acknowledge his work in that respect. Any other questions and comments, please drop me in chat, and then we can read them. But after the two presenters, and our second presenter has as well great importance in shaping Macedonian state and Macedonian politics. And for today, we have Professor Frchkoski as one of the most prominent Macedonian intellectual and scholars. He has his research and his opus. He's considered to be multicultural and liberal as a politician and scientist as well. So Frchkoski was minister in Macedonian government of Interior Affairs, Police and Foreign Affairs in the period from 1999 to 1997. He's drafted a new Macedonian constitution, and he was a part of the team that was working on the Ohrid Framework Agreement in 2001. He's an author of a number of fundamental books and materials in the areas of the human rights and resolution in the conflicts. Now he's serving his position as a rector of the American University of Bonn. So Professor Frchkoski today will give an address about the policy of identities and liberal democracies in the transitional countries in the region. Professor, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. I will try to concentrate myself on issue of phenomenology, how identity is constructed in post-communist countries. And I will try to do that in 15 minutes stoically and avoiding the syndrome of professor. Whatever they say, they will do in 45 minutes. If you exclude making laugh, probably. Well, 15 minutes. Construction of identity. When you enter in this horrible vacuum of values after the falling down of authoritarian regime, as communist, soft socialism, socialism of ex-Yugoslavia, whatever you want, practically two meta emotions survive. That is ethnical issue and religious issue. The both are problem for normal liberal democracy, not problem as such, but problem when they dominate political spectrum. Especially they are problem when they become a motive and motivation issue, motivation roots of the populistic politics. We ended during this period in more or less soft or hybrid authoritarian regimes all over the Balkan, especially in Western Balkan, with a small and very teeny exclusions, few countries. And secondly, liberals are lost in space again. In this, between right-wing populism, sometimes left populism of Syriza and parties like that, liberals in middle are mostly lost the ground. Because the question of this politics is politics of emotion, vis-a-vis what Denko previously says, the basis of that politics are emotions. And that will always be. Liberals take for granted that emotions are democracy is something you could take for granted. There's something like neutral liberal structure, Rawlsian one mostly. Everybody rationally will have to accept that, and system will goes and absorb emotions inside, transform in some kind of magically rationality. That will not go. That will not be the case. And we are gonna rock that wall, that practically stone, and take some kind of conclusions after that. Mostly, the construction of identity goes around ethnical centricity, ethnical centric identity. After the falling down of communism, after entering this horrible vacuum of values, it shows us that political culture, illiberal political culture, is a big problem for producing effective democracy. You could produce a structure of elections, political pluralism, parties, but you still miss something substantial, which means individual human rights and effective protection of that structure of rule of law. And that become a problem for 30 years, bloody 30 years, not for 3, 5, or 4 cycles of elections. 30 years, still problem. You have some kind of 8 election cycles in the countries around, but still you have parties with a problematic issue toward ruling of law and generally structure of pluralistic democracy. Still you have kind of organistic approach to a society, nation as a whole, nation as organism, and just Schmittian approach to policy, enemies outside, enemies inside. That structure is a very living structure in most of these countries. But emotions are in substance, and ethnical construction goes in 2 directions. One is producing authoritarian regime leading by some kind of strongman. In Serbia, 2 or 3, in Croatia also, in Bosnia in 3 parts, in Montenegro, 3 years, 1 more or less person. Macedonia is more complicated issue, but we had that experience of 11 horrible years under authoritarian regime. Later than other experience, but still horrible. And more or less, not to mention Turkey, not to mention Hungary, which is in the European Union, and Poland also. This kind of reborn authoritarian, soft authoritarian regimes are very lively. What you need to control, but just to analyze around, is how that identity is structured. It goes in one direction, I will say, from now in the future, it means organizing them in an organistic way with populist leadership, producing kind of fear around the country that we are under attack, that one party, more or less, one populistic party is defending us, and there is enemy outside, enemy inside. That story goes in a good Hegelian way backward in producing, creation your roots and history, or recreation your history. That is fantasy, mostly Lacanian based, producing a fantasy about your ancient roots, very important nation, which have 3 levels of construction. One, famous past. After that horrible middle period with temptation, being victims of the various conspiracies, historical, and after that, this 3rd contemporary part, slightly suggesting that contemporary new strong men will reborn this famous past. And this 3 parts of issue as always story in Turkey, Macedonia, with ancient Macedonia, and Macedonia as victim, and after that, Vomero, Gruevistic Macedonia, whatever, with the new roots in the ancient Macedonian people, Orban also, Serbia also, Albanians also, Croatia also, same story. The most of the country who wait entering European Unions are hybrid regime, soft authoritarian regime, even today. Don't be don't be, tolerant and not to see that. They are semi-authoritarian regime, and still they have support of European Union in this process of opening the entering doors and entering in process of negotiation for membership. That emotion goes in these two directions, backward and forward, with populist hard men leading the story, leading the narrative. What are the chances? What are the chances of the liberals in the story? The chance of the liberals is that somebody will have to take responsibility. Liberals will have to forget the issue. The democracy and the rule of law will come as rationality enter the story, and some kind of modernization, and that issue of modernizing, especially Moderna is suffering that problem, will automatically burn the rational instinct of the people, and they will become tolerant and blah blah and so forth. That will not be the case. Democracy is such a fragile issue. You will have to defend that with emotion with emotion. Ideology of liberals vis-a-vis ideology of right-wing and new right-wings. Nothing else is the story. No rationality will come with entering the film and will save us. We will have to produce enough attractive, for example, emancipating Macedonians as vis-a-vis Macedonians in the cage, and put that on a state of elections in Macedonia, also in Serbia, also in Croatia, also. Produce, attract ideological profile of the person you want to vote for, and that is question of left, right, middle structure of parties. Liberals mostly on the left, and liberals of the center. They do not produce. They lose the game in the culture. They always lose the game in culture vis-a-vis traditionalists, because the traditionalists have probably the same package, more or less, always done with our traditions, a little bit narrative about our special role in history, blah blah, about religion, about our importance in the history, and so that is package you practically have finalized. The leftists and liberal leftists especially have nothing of that saying. They will have to produce that. They will have to construct that. And they do not do that. Practically, they lay down on a automatically or some kind of historical determinism that modernization will produce such effect. And we are facing new and new defeats of the lefts in Europe also, vis-a-vis new rights and vis-a-vis left populism on Spain, Italy, and Greece. Liberals in middle are lost in space. Well, what are the possible conditions for basically decent liberal chances in a transitional society with an illiberal political culture, with this kind of construction of identity around ethnical centricity and religion exclusion or exclusivity? And our experience is also that kind of experience, despite that is temporarily probably lost after the 8-10 years in beginning. We enter in the game of Balkanic country again, but today again we repeat that issue with some kind of conclusions we could draw down. Also, one issue is that you will have, if you could, produce a liberal constitution as good as possible. As good as possible. You will have to do that. Some kind of structure, even that is abstract, even sometimes that is put in Praetorian way from top to the bottom. But you will have to do that. Some normative structure you will have to produce in the beginning. Even taking account that that normative structure will not be enough, that will be like, a good suit for a person who do not sue that suit. But nevertheless, you will have to try to produce that. And in Macedonia, I think that we did that. in the beginning. And that constitutions help us vis-a-vis issue of minorities, vis-a-vis this liberal structure of division of power inside, protection of human rights, blah, blah, supporting of bad intercommission. We have some kind of positive effect of that. Till now, that constitution is in power. Secondly, and around that constitution, you need to do this few systematic organic laws, which are like using a language, citizenship, few laws around. That is normative structure. You will have to produce decent one, in a sense, if you have chance. If you have chance. Second issue is that you will have to produce a practice. It's depend of the very rare flower in the transitional country, responsible political elites. Responsible political elite is a key issue. Without that, you will enter in some kind of mess. Responsible political elite means that they will have to know what is going on the ground, how your people is organized, what is part of the nationalist power, what you will have to do, and you will have to take responsibility for that. And that is not easy. You will lose everything sometimes. You will lose elections. You cannot go on the street sometimes. After the bringing down the constitution, we are faced with our leftist party, not just Ljubomir and rightist party, who want some kind of national constitution. When you ask them what is the national constitution, they will bring down more or less on an apartheid issue, that we will have to be domestic guys in our country and some others will have to be guests. And guests will have to have less rights. I mean, how you guess you have the same rights with the domestic. That was more or less national constitution. And you will have to fight that. You will have to fight it with your party, leftist party, social democrats, partly, was the same, with the same ideas. You are completely alone. You feel alone when you fight for that. And you will have to pay the price for that. You cannot go on the street sometimes. They attack you on the street. That you are betrayed your country, that you do not give chance for your country to be national for the first time and only time in the history. Immediately civil constitution. What does that mean, civil constitution? No, from the beginning. On the Ohrid agreement, the same issue. President Frchkoski have 1.5 support in the public after the signing of Ohrid agreement, 1.5%. It's the lowest in the history, I mean, for a president. We, with advisor of them, we cannot walk on the streets in that time. You have to take responsibility for that and pay the price. And that is emotion. That are emotions. You fight for you believe in. You cannot take for granted. And after that, after 8 years, and after that main issues and main experience, you lose the game. And nationalists come on power. And the story is that after that, you will have to fight against nationalists. And with the international help, thanks God, you more or less have some kind of decent structure and chances to build a democracy again. And that is the story of that, of these transitional countries. But emotions, do not underestimate them. Liberals lose the game when they do not understand that politics is always about emotions. But you will have manipulated emotions, you will have to face nationalistic emotions, you will have to defend your liberty and emotions about LGBT rights, about the minority rights, about everything, and your liberal constitution and the human rights. And that are the emotions. You will have to fight for that. We will have to fight for that. And that is a story, my simple picture of the story of transition in Western Balkan, mostly in Macedonia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. Professor Frchkoski was speaking about the populism that comes after the process of establishing a new country, then creating of the identities and national building and all the positions that we have in the last 30 years, that a conflict that are rising between the society segments. and he was speaking about the crisis of the liberal democracy in addressing those issues that are coming as a part of these strong emotions that are related to the concept of the identity, especially overcoming those positions of the victims and introducing, let's say, liberal civic constitution in respect of the nationalistic one, and the permanent fight that actually we are facing every day in establishing some kind of values that are existing in society and building the democratic country. So thank you very much for your address, and I will open the floor for the audience. We already have 2 questions, and I will read them one by one. Let's say in another 10 minutes we can discuss about your ideas. I have one question here for the Professor Maleski. What role did America play in defining the state of Macedonia, and why? And why did Greece and Serbia oppose it? That will be the first question for
Lord Peter Carrington.
From Francesca Rizzo, sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Lord Peter Carrington, who headed the conference on Yugoslavia and who was the foreign minister of Great Britain and Secretary General of NATO, used to say, you know, American foreign policy is very predictable. They always take the side of the weaker party. So in Yugoslavia, we were a weaker party. But it was not only a weaker party towards probably all the rest, but especially towards Serbia, with which we border, and the pressures from the regime of Milosevic. But it was not enough to be only weak. You should be, as I said, honest and principled, especially when you are small. You know? And it is an important lesson in international politics. I personally had a long talk at the State Department at the beginning of the 90s with then already Secretary of State Lawrence Egerberger. And I can tell you that after 45 minutes of explaining what the position is in the Yugoslav conflict, he agreed with it. The problem was that the situation did not turn out to be that way. So it's not so bad for small states in contemporary world, I must tell you. It must have been terrible during or before the First World War, Second World War. Now there are some principles that if you comply with, but sincerely, if you try to make a democratic society, if you do not instigate war, if you work for human rights, you'll get the support, even though you don't achieve maybe much, because everyone is aware of our history and tradition and the things that the Professor Frchkoski just spoke of. So they know, but they support you if you are on the right path. And we always did have the support of the United States. It's amazing how the domestic nationalistic public does not appreciate that. In fact, they think that behind all this is the United States, behind all these national defeats of Macedonia, when the opposite is true, that we survived as a state because of that support, mainly that support.
Thank you very much. I have a question here for Professor Frchkoski. Giovanni Autori. Yes. Democracies are built on parliamentary, but also cultural dialectics. Do these conditions exist in Macedonia today?
Well, Macedonia is a good example, even frontline example. Kind of democracy we build is not only normal democracy, it's a multicultural democracy. It's not democracy in multicultural society, because multicultural societies are all around us. But the institutions of democracy when you have multicultural democracy. What that means, you have some specific institutions which is not mentioned in, I will say in quotation mark, normal liberal democracies on the West, when you have more or less homogeneous nation of homogeneous culture dominated in that countries. You have practically, mostly, I will simplify that, two practices different. One is institutional changes or institutional novelty, new institutions, which is, for example, Badinter voting in the parliament. It's a double voting when you protect minority voting for being overlapped by majority, which is not the case in the normal parliaments. We do not have this kind of problem. Or you have some kind of specific rules of voting which you intend to be by consensus on some issues. But very rare, not misuse consensus. That will be a problem sometimes. But use this kind of intervene of the significant third side. What I mean, hotspot in a negotiation between majority and minority in various ethnical issues, you will have to open to so-called soft arbitrage or soft mediation of an expert group from above. Americans, Europeans, Council of Europe, whatever it. Do not close that in a bilateral debate or dialogue between government and minorities. In that case, you have distrust, which will blockade some kind of issues. You will have to do that tango, you will have to play in three. Government, majority, minority, and significant third. Do that in triangle. Issue of using a language, issue of language in higher education, participation in police, some structure which is very hot. Very hot. It become immediate political issue. Do that, open the issue from the intervene from inside. That was very useful medicine for a lacking of trust between the parties who negotiate in multicultural societies, which is a new element. You cannot find that generally. You cannot find that in, I say, majoritarian democracy of a classical type. You have this kind of parallel semi-institution, gray zone in which you negotiate parallelly with the institutions. For example, you have meeting of the party leaders. There is no institution like meeting of the party leaders in Macedonia or in any countries. That is parallel institution, but you sometimes do a great job during that meetings. This kind of negotiation, kind of diplomacy in internal politics, not in external politics, which is characteristic of multicultural democracy, which is used by Macedonia. And that's why Macedonia is a very useful example for the debate. For example, Kimlicka, Charles Taylor, even Liebhardt do not solve the issue of veto in multicultural society. That is nightmare. Despite they know that the veto system and veto issue is important and have to be done, they have no solution which kind of veto. They are afraid that the veto could blockade the efficiency of the system. Macedonia has veto, which is very efficient and which is not misused. And nobody talk about that because our theoreticians hate our system. They think that our system is kind of artificial system done under the pressure. We are weak and we have no normal democracy, and they are, they have this kind of passion to be normal democracy. They do not know what they really have. They do not know how to sell that in a front line of debating about democracy. And Macedonia has that experience and some kind of institutions which could help.
Thank you very much. I will read the questions that are there, and then we can continue. For Professor Maleski, do you believe that this is not connected with the topic, but you can give an overview if you prefer. Do you believe, Anthony Mishka, do you believe that situation with Bulgaria will be solved since Bulgaria had vetoed North Macedonia for starting the negotiation with EU?
Yes, I do believe it will be solved, but I really don't know how long it will take us to resolve the previous issue with Greece, it took us 27 years. Now, we have here two official narratives, which is very difficult to expect to come to a common ground. One, is that from Bulgaria, since in the Ottoman Empire, you were part of that Bulgarian cultural sphere, and that pan-Bulgarian idea, the schools that were created there at that time in the Ottoman Empire, and the leaders of the resistance against Turkish occupation, you are today Bulgarians. That is, in fact, the position. On the other side, you have our nationalist position, which says we have nothing to do with the history of Bulgaria. We have our own history, which has always been something very different. So when will this liberal narrative take root? Now that is a big dilemma. Few people here in Macedonia are educated in that liberal narrative, which speaks about the turn of the wheel of history and the creation of the Macedonian nation in a very, very normal way, and is a big question. There is a group of such liberally minded, very fine Bulgarian intellectuals. Alas, not many in Macedonia share those views. Usually we like them because they criticize the official policy of the Bulgarian state, as I see it in our media, so we try to underline that fact, but we are not able to see that we lack such people here. So this would be a bridge, I think, but finally politics will have to resolve this problem, because as in the case with Greece, liberal-minded people in Greece never had problems with the name that we used, Macedonia, nor did liberal-minded Macedonians think that they were anything else but a Slavic-speaking people and not direct descendants of ancient Macedonia. So they did not resolve the problem. We did not resolve the problem. We were just anticipators of the future. Politics will have to do that.
Thank you. And there is maybe some other question you can just add to that. Is the current situation of the state of Macedonia in terms of the democratic process? Is there a democratic cultural tradition to lean on? Do you believe that the democratic processes are present here in this country? Is there any democratic culture we can build upon it?
Is a question toward whom?
Oh, it's actually a question to Professor Maleski, but since Professor Frchkoski, you are addressing the same issues, I will suggest to both of you, you can answer the question. Okay? You can go with Professor Frchkoski first, please.
Well, shortly, we have luck that we survived this kind of authoritarian regime. More or less, the main party of the central left survived, which is not the case in Serbia. They do not practically have opposition to leading strongman. I think that the main structure of democracy is established. The problem is with the judiciary independence and slightly with the media position. The judiciary independence is a goddamn problem. And they cannot build the problem of responsibility of the government, governing parties are to be restrained from the involvement in the judiciary as it is. Judiciary is not perfect, and it's far from perfect, but we have to be leave alone and accept that division of the power. That is very hard. That is very hard to be done, even for the leftist government who rhetorically support that. That issue of division of the power with the judiciary is a key issue behind the rule of law, and we will have to do that. That was a problem. Still, media also, responsibility in the media, easy using of the fake news, and using media for power enforcement, enlargement, is very often. This kind of post-truth society make a huge mess, and producing a kind of superstructure of the lies is very easy. To harm the people through the media is very easy. But that is something you could do inside of the more or less basically free media enterprise in Macedonia. But still, that is a problem. This democracy is mainly based on a media instrument and fighting others through the media. And media is very important. And they are not out of the picture of the power. These two issues I find important. Human rights mostly, that goes in the right direction. Macedonians are still very tough to the migrants issue, to the phobia various, to the LGBT. LGBT is still, well, probably the best in the region, but still not satisfactory. Discriminatory toward Romas, still. But nevertheless, it goes in the right direction. Still, we have a best climate around, if you compare with the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Professor Maleski, you would like to say a few words, because the question was from Esther Sabatino. Maybe he would like to hear your opinion about that.
Sure. I knew in theory from books that in its deepest sense, democracy is a state of mind. It's not about the institutions only, about the political parties, about the parliament, about the media. It's a state of mind. We do not have a democratic state of mind. And this is the biggest problem. How is this achieved? For the intellectuals, it's easy. Professors like us should sit and read and work and go outside and talk to people and understand. And I can tell you a lot of them do not do that because they like to sit here and they like to take part in these party squabbles because it pays best, because you don't complicate your life if you try to bring something new. So without democratic state of mind, which is understandable because prior to 91, we have not had one day of democracy. Our whole historical legacy is autocracy, starting with the 500 years under Ottoman rule and then going on with the autocratic regimes in the interwar period with the one-party socialism, communism in Yugoslavia. So democracy really is not what a professor of democracy has said, the only game in town. there are many games in town, and democracy is not really the only game in town. I also agree that we should have some kind of a religious relationship towards democracy. We should be dedicated towards democracy. It is these principles that oblige us to behave in a certain manner. Now, that I do not see enough in our society. And I must say, when we speak about the media, when we speak about the political institutions, when we speak about the judiciary, all these institutions are projections of the values that these people have and that occupy these positions. So it will be a long journey ahead for generations until we elevate this to a level, to acceptable democratic level of a democratic state of mind. It would be very much in our interest, of course, to have the assistance of the European Union, to start negotiations with the European Union, because we need them really, really badly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are over the time, but I have only 2 questions for Professor Frchkoski. You can combine them, and maybe the last one for the Denko Maleski, and we will finish with a question. So for Professor Frchkoski, what is from Vesna Cvetanovska, what is your opinion regarding the definition of identities today? And do you think that Ohrid Framework Agreement is reaching its goals? So you can combine them if you like.
Well, identity is important. You cannot skip that. Despite that, building identity is built on the issue of border between us and them. Is always that. Democracy is built on a different principle. The law, everything else is not important. They need a law blindness for equality, basic equality. Identity is built on opposite principle. Me as identity as Macedonian will difference vis-a-vis Bulgarians. To define my identity vis-a-vis Bulgarian, not equality. Equality is something you mix identity and produce. In multicultural society, you produce tension with that. The most tricky situation is when the identity is not clear, like in Bosnia. And the war is very near to that issue. Clear identities sometimes help you in the beginning because the issue is clean. You are here, they are there. And after that, you need agreement, political agreement, and peace is reachable. But in the same time, is hard to combine identity with the democracy because there are different principles that are built on. That is not democracy plus identity. Identity completely changed democratic narrative if it dominates. In that sense, you need constitution bay of 60-70% of individual rights, that is identity democracy, plus collective rights or justice for a group. That balance is hard to be reached, like always in life, but that is balance guaranteed successful efficiency of multicultural democracy. You need individual rights to dominate, and some groups to be open to the equality of individual rights, not to be completely closed in their culture narratives. But in the same time, identity delivers us belonging issue. And belonging is very important. You cannot do that alone in the life, in the politics, whatever. You need that kind of belonging, intimacy of belonging, mission, chained in the infinity with your nation, not alone. You cannot produce a culture being alone completely. There's few people completely alone and produce a culture. You see some kind of intellectual live in Paris and they are from Romania or Hungary. Most of them are deeply in their culture. They live and die in that. And that kind of belonging is strong. And that is main issue, belong to. But I will say, level of being in the culture is depend of your emancipation, individual integrity you produce for yourself, and that balance is important to emanate yourself and your individual rights and relations to with others is a key issue. My identity is produced in dialogue with the others. I cannot produce and I cannot say what I am without relation to others. That is Levina's issue, and definitely Levina's issue. You produce your identity only in relation with the others and absorbing that relations, defining what you are really. And that is where I put the issue of identity. But importance of identity do not underestimate.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe the last question, and we will finish here for today for Professor Maleski. Do you think that today's international relations are more driven by law or by the politics, and in respect toward Macedonia and towards Balkan countries?
Could you repeat that again, Natalia, please?
Do you think that today's international relations are more driven by law or by the politics in respect of the policies toward Macedonia and the other Balkan countries?
Well, I tried to explain it. This was what I was speaking in my expose at the
Maybe
beginning.
as a summary now.
At the beginning, a summary.
As end point.
Law does not exist in a vacuum. I tried to explain that in the case of Macedonia. It does not exist in a vacuum. If you could lead, it exists in international politics, where the main actors, the states, are driven by their interests, and power is a very important element also. So that's why there are at least three kinds of states. There are big powers, which have the capability of influencing world events. There are regional powers which influence the region, and there are small states like Macedonia, and their job is to survive in this world. So the emotional element aside, if you can put it, and emotion is very important, as Professor Frchkoski said, because everyone thinks that you are a state and I'm a state. It's all the same. In fact, that's not so. So law does not function in a vacuum. You can use it to promote your interest, but you must adapt to the interests of that states have. May I just say, going back to the beginning of the 90s, Thorvald Stoltenberg, the father of the present Secretary General of NATO, was foreign minister of Norway. He came to Skopje, and we had a talk here together with President Gligorov, and we said to him, you are a Scandinavian country, you are well known for respect of international law, for promotion of values. Could you not recognize Macedonia right away under our name, because you know that law is on our side? And he said, oh, no, why not? He said, that wouldn't pass in parliament. How come? I said, well, we have very big shipyard interests with Greece. We build ships for Greece, and that would be difficult to achieve in our parliament, meaning its politics, its interests, its relations with allies. So that is the case. The problem with a small state is that it does not have any other means. It does not have the power, so it clings to the law, and it should. if you don't have anything else, you should be on the right side of the law, but do not expect that without understanding the logic of politics, the logic of interests, the logic of power, you can understand international politics.
Thank you very much.
Natalia, and I would like to congratulate my daughter Neda for her birthday today. I remember the day when she was born, not very long ago.
Yes. Happy
you,
birthday to all of us. We will
you.
celebrate later, just to finish with this.
This,
You are all invited.
Natalie, if you allow me to say, this is an excellent present to have my father and Professor Frchkoski today here. Really, it's an exceptional opportunity. Actually, we have been, I'm leading the Center for Change Management for 13 years. And so far, we haven't had such a topic and a possibility to invite them to be keynote speakers. So thank you very much. It is an excellent birthday present.
Okay.
I'm sure they're happy about that as well. So thank you once again for all your contributions, for the presenters. Thank you for the participants for being with us and your patience with your comments and questions. We are finishing for today's agenda. I'm inviting you to join us tomorrow. Tomorrow we will start at 10 o'clock. We have as well interesting speakers. We will have as well, aside from the political normative view, we will have some kind of artistic expression. We have our professors of art and researchers in that respect that will present their views in transition through their viewpoint, let's say, through their glasses that we may wear, overseeing that part of the society. So it will be interesting. So please join us tomorrow and see you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.